Hello, everyone. Welcome back to C-PTSD on the Road to Recovery with Pop Woodman. This is episode two uh, of this podcast. And today we're going to be talking about what is C-PTSD. What is it? It is the initials stand for Complex Post Traumatic Stress Disorder. Um, it's very similar to PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. There are a lot of overlapping symptoms between the two diagnoses, if you will. They're considered to be sibling conditions because they're so similar in symptoms and ways we react to things and so on and so forth. And both CPTSD and PTSD share many causes, common causes for both. Um, CPTSD is caused by chronic trauma, usually from infancy to adult. And in other words, being chronic trauma, this is repeated trauma over a lifetime, really, when you think about it, because what they're looking at with CPTSD is what occurred in your life from infancy to about 18 years old. What kind of events happened in your life? And when I mean events, I'm talking about traumatic, stressful events. And so this is the big difference. PTSD, CPTSD is a chronic trauma, is caused by chronic trauma that has gone on for years from infancy to adulthood. Both CPTSD and PTSD share uh, a very close symptom profile. In other words, if we have CPTSD or PTSD, we exhibit the same kind of symptoms or behaviors or issues in life, if you will. So, shared causes are traumatic events. Both, if you have PTSD or you have CPTSD, you have experienced some traumatic events in your life. PTSD generally is caused by a singular event that has occurred in adulthood. Somebody witnesses a horrendous crime or a terrible accident, or they're sent off to war. Um, these are the things that bring on PTSD in adults. And see, this is the difference. CPTSD is something that someone has had from the time they were basically an infant growing up through all the effects on their life, where PTSD is something major has happened and it's very traumatic and it's affecting a person. So there's a lot of similarities between the two and differences as well. Uh, CPTSD is caused by sustained, repeated, and multiple traumatic events, as well as long periods of trauma in someone's life. So, this is why it's called complex PTSD. It's not a one time event. There's a whole lot of events in a person's history that have brought about these symptoms, and they're seeking treatment for the symptoms. So, there is a difference for sure. PTSD itself was formally recognized, by mental institutions and psychiatry, all those things. It was formally recognized in the 1980s, and we've heard a lot about it since then. Uh, and certainly, a lot of it is related to folks who have been in service to our country, who have been off to war and have come back after experiencing these traumatic events. They develop post-traumatic stress disorder. A long time ago, like in World War II, they called it shell shock. People would come home from after the war and just not function the way they did, not seem to be the same person anymore that they were before they went off to war. And so that finally they came up with a term for it, a diagnosis for it, and that is PTSD. And there are a lot of folks that deal with it, not only because they've been to war, but police officers, firemen, EMTs, There's a lot of people that have some very traumatic experiences in their career, and this is something that may affect some of them. Now, CPTSD is a relatively new recognized condition, if you will, and the World Health Organization has it in their manuals concerning mental health diagnoses and so on, but it's not in the American uh, version of that, if you will. But the world, if you will, the World Health Organization recognizes complex PTSD now. And this is a relatively new event that they actually recognize it. So, we're talking about CPTSD. What is it? Well, we can get a better idea about what it is by what the symptoms are. Like I said, there's shared symptoms between PTSD and CPTSD. Uh, some of the shared symptoms are re-experiencing events. In other words, like flashbacks. You re-experience, like it's happening in real time, the event that caused you the PTSD or the events that cause complex PTSD. You re-experience the events that you experienced in the past. They keep haunting, if you will. And a lot of people, this is what they call their demons, these memories that come back and these feelings and issues surrounding these things. It's common for a lot of people to deal with that. And there's avoidance issues. People with PTSD and complex PTSD avoid social events. They keep to themselves a lot of times. They don't want to talk about what's going on with them and so on. So there's a lot of avoidance issues. Something that definitely shows up in both groups is change in mood and thinking. All of a sudden their mood will change from, they could be happy as anything, but something stimulates a memory, or things occur that change the mood instantly and change how their thought process works, and it becomes very visible with some folks when this happens. And we're going to talk more about all these in detail as we go along, as we look through what this is all about and how it's treated and so on. You have change in mood, change in thinking, and feeling on edge. I know me myself, I feel on edge a lot. uh, any people who know me, like if we go to a restaurant together, guess who's going to want to sit with his back to the wall so he can see the door of the restaurant or wherever we might be? I To this day, I still want to know what's coming through the door, and I really don't like having a lot of people to my back and so on. So I'm on edge. Other ways that somebody might exhibit being on edge is they stand back away from the crowd. They're constantly watching the crowd, they're watching the environment around them, they're just waiting for something bad to happen. So that's one of the common shared symptoms of both CPTSD and PTSD. CPTSD has actually three additional symptoms. One is emotional dysregulation, and that means your emotions get dysregulated, they get out of control. You may be going along fine, and then something happens, and you just react in a way that just doesn't seem like you. And you may react in a very dangerous way in particular situations, and so on. Um, Sometimes people just start raging over something that you might think is minor, but it brings up memories and emotions that they just can't deal with in the moment, and they become dysregulated. Again, these are tough topics we'll cover as we go through, and I'm going to put you in touch with people who can share more as well, different videos and different websites and so on as time goes by. So we have emotional dysregulation, impaired self worth, in other words, low self esteem. Uh, complex PTSD, this is a big symptom that a lot of folks have. They have a very bad self image, very low self esteem. Some of them don't even feel worthy of life. They feel like they're more of a burden and a problem to the world than anything else. And they've learned through experience that their self worth isn't very high, put it that way. And then there's interpersonal problems, in other words, relationships, problems communicating and helping others to understand where you're coming from, not understanding where others are coming from, and so on, like that. So it has major effects on people's emotions and how they deal with things. Their self esteem is low, and they also have a lot of issues dealing with other people because they just withdraw and so on. Again, more will come in the future as we talk about these things. Um, Other CPTSD symptoms, we've kind of covered it already here. It's difficulty controlling your emotions, not always reacting in the way you should emotionally in a particular situation, and so on. Preoccupation with the abuser, somebody who abused them in the past. They can't forgive it. They can't stop thinking about that person. That person, even if if they show up in their lives years later, they can uh, really elicit some bad reactions from the person. So, people have a tendency to be preoccupied with the person or persons who abused them or neglected them, and so on. Also, the negative self view. We don't, people with CPTSD, we have a tendency to not think much of ourselves. We've been told one way or another in different ways over a lifetime that you're not like everybody else, and so on, those kinds of things. Again, difficulty with relationships, interacting with other people, whether it be on a social level or a personal level, relationships with your spouse, your children, your parents. It can be affect quite a few areas in a person's life for sure. There's a sense of hopelessness, that there's no hope of ever getting better, no hope of being normal, as we say, or be like other people. It's just this deep sense of hopelessness. And another thing that occurs a lot of times, and I think probably people growing up in religious backgrounds and being abused by people in that group or in the family or so on, causes people to lose their beliefs. They may had believed in God and really wanted to be a good Christian, as we say, but somewhere along the way, because of the people around them and the events that have occurred, they just lose all belief in that kind of thing. And of course, one of the biggest things that hangs on and causes issues is that low self-esteem. If you don't have a healthy self-esteem, you do not look at the world the same way as everybody else does, and you don't think the world looks at you the same way they look at everybody else. These are some of the issues that come with this complex PTSD. So, how do you get evaluated to find out if you do have complex PTSD? Well, certainly you need to go to a professional. I wouldn't recommend self diagnosing. Like I shared in the first video, I was having a lot of health issues and medical issues, and I was being seen at Mayo Clinic, and the decision was made I needed to have bariatric surgery before I could have any other nerve and joint and muscle issues attended to. I needed to get the weight off, and so I had to go for a psychological evaluation. And one of the things that was done during this evaluation is the practitioner that was interviewing me used a form that is called the Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire, or ACEs, ACE. Um, this is a tool that they use. There are 10 questions concerning adverse childhood experiences. They're going to ask you about things that happened in your home uh, from the time you were very little, from whatever you can remember. 10 different questions about your experiences as a child coming up from infancy to 18 years old. And they do have different versions of this questionnaire for teens and children, but the adult version, of course, is uh, what she used to evaluate me. There's 10, 10 questions on the sheet that they go down through and ask you about what's going on in your lives. And they're what they're trying to do is they're trying to find out how many of these things have you experienced personally. What have you endured in your life growing up that has brought you to where you are? It's kind of what it's about. um, so the aces score at the end of answering all the questions is the total number of experiences that you experienced from the time of infancy until about 18 years old. And one of the things I was told in the interview is that, yes, you definitely have this. Uh, most people with C-PTSD can answer yes to at least 4 out of the 10 questions. When I did, when she asked me the questions in the interview, and I scored 8 out of 10, which pretty high. And so we talked about what all that meant and how that was, and she was very encouraging that this is what went on, but this is not where you are now, and go from there, kind of thing. So I just wanted to do this episode to just give us a little better idea of what CPTSD is compared to PTSD, how the symptoms overlap, how they're very similar in a lot of ways and not similar in other ways. And it's important to know that. Uh, you know, a one time event that is very traumatic and that causes PTSD, uh, maybe just a little easier to work through than somebody who has experienced abuse, neglect, violence, uh, parents being arrested, and all kinds of things that happen in unhealthy households. It's a lifetime experience from infancy to 18 that is accumulated and caused the issues that have brought CPTSD to the forefront, if you will. And so there's a lot to be dealt with, and usually someone CPTSD doesn't get over it right away. There is healing and there is growth and there is change, but it's going to take time. It took time to get to where you are. It's going to take time to be whole again. And like I said, I'm 60 years old and I'm finally dealing with this in my life. And some of my traumatic events went beyond childhood into adulthood, and kind of shaped my early marriage and my view of a lot of things. Um, Again, more stuff will be shared as time goes by because I'm in the process of recovering from it myself. I'm trying to heal. It's later in life. I'm 60 years old. I'd really love to have the best life possible from here on out and not have to continuously be reminded of uh, the past and the hurt and the shame and the pain that comes with all that. So that's what I wanted to share in this episode. And bear in mind, I am not a professional counselor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a physician. Uh, I am a minister, um, but this is outside of my purview, if you will. And I'm learning as I go, and I'm sharing as I go, because I believe there's probably a lot of men in my age bracket who have been through similar things and have struggled their entire life, not really knowing why, not understanding the things they were feeling, saying, doing, and so on. But, but there is hope. And that's why I want to share this stuff, because there is hope. You can figure out where to go from here. And Lord willing, we'll get together regularly and talk about this. Like I said in the beginning, I'm hoping to do an episode a week, usually released on Tuesday or Wednesday, most likely. And I would encourage you to come back and walk with me on the road to recovery. Well, God bless everyone. Lord willing, we'll see each other again soon. Take care.